The crystalline halls of the Terran Velthine Integration Academy shimmered with bioluminescent veins, casting shadows that moved like living things. Kira Voss stood at the edge of the common plaza, watching 3 Velthine adolescents corner something small near the recycling alcove. Their chittering voices carried across the space, sharp, mocking, cruel. She'd seen this before. Different species, different worlds, same ugly pattern. The small figure pressed against the wall was barely 3 feet tall, her pale blue skin translucent enough to show the faint glow of her circulatory system beneath. A Velthine child, maybe 8 standard years old. Her head tendrils lay flat against her skull in terror as the older students loomed over her. "Your kind shouldn't even be here," one of the bullies hissed in accented galactic standard. "Go back to the outer colonies where you belong." Kira's boots made no sound on the smooth floor as she crossed the distance. She'd learned to move quietly during her years in the Diplomatic Corps Security Division. The 3 adolescents didn't notice her until her shadow fell across them. "Problem here?" Her voice was level, professional. The tallest bully turned, his dermal ridges flaring in irritation. "This doesn't concern humans, guard. This is a Velthine matter." The child looked scared. "That concerns me. She's a mudblood. Half-caste. Her mother mated with an outer system Velthine. She dilutes our bloodline by being here." The small girl whimpered. Her large eyes, too large for her delicate face, filled with tears that refracted the hall lights into tiny rainbows. Kira's expression didn't change. She'd heard every variation of this poison across a dozen worlds. "Step back. Now." "Or what?" The bully's confidence came from numbers, from social standing, from the certainty that a human guard wouldn't dare touch Velthine nobility. Kira's hand moved to her sidearm, not drawing it, just resting there. "Or I file an official report citing harassment of a minor, which triggers a tribunal hearing under Integration Accord Section 7. Your families will be summoned. Your educational status will be reviewed." She paused. "Step back." The weight of bureaucracy did what force couldn't. The 3 adolescents exchanged glances, then retreated with theatrical slowness, their contempt barely masked. As they departed, the lead bully looked back. "The matriarch will hear about this, human. You've made a mistake." When they were gone, Kira knelt beside the small girl. "Are you hurt?" The child shook her head, tendrils trembling. Up close, Kira could see the slight differences. The girl's pigmentation was lighter, her bone structure more delicate than typical Velthine children. The markers of mixed heritage that made her a target. "What's your name?" "Linnea." The voice was barely audible. "Okay, Linnea. I'm Kira. I'm going to walk you to your residential sector. Is that all right?" The girl nodded, still pressed against the wall. When Kira offered her hand, Linnea stared at it for a long moment before placing her small, cool fingers in Kira's palm. They walked in silence through corridors that grew progressively emptier as other students deliberately took alternate routes. Kira felt the familiar weight of isolation, the same invisible barrier she'd seen around human children in predominantly alien schools, around any child marked as different. At the entrance to the residential wing, Linnea finally spoke. "They do this every day. Have you reported it? To who?" The question held no defiance, only resignation. "The instructors are all from the inner bloodlines. They look at me the same way." Kira's jaw tightened. "That's going to change. You can't change what you are." Linnea pulled her hand free. "Thank you for helping. But you shouldn't have. They'll make it worse now." Before Kira could respond, the child slipped through the entrance and disappeared into the dormitory maze. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving Kira alone in the hallway. She stood there for several seconds, processing. Then, she activated her wrist comm and began recording her incident report, knowing full well it would be filed, acknowledged, and quietly buried. The Velthine held 3 seats on the Integration Council. Humans held 1. The mathematics of power were simple and brutal. But mathematics had never stopped Kira before. She was halfway through her report when footsteps echoed from the main corridor, multiple sets, moving in synchronized precision. Royal Guard. She recognized their gait before they appeared, 6 Valthene warriors in ceremonial armor that shifted colors like oil on water. Between them walked a figure that made Kira's training kick in before conscious thought. She'd seen Queen Sekhet only in official transmissions. In person, the Valthene monarch was both smaller and more imposing than Kira had imagined. Her height barely exceeded Kira's shoulder, but she moved with the controlled grace of apex predators across the galaxy. Her ceremonial robes draped like living shadow, and her head tendrils were adorned with rings of precious metal that marked her bloodline's antiquity. The Queen's eyes, black as deep space, with silver pupils that contracted in the light, fixed on Kira with absolute focus. For 3 heartbeats, either moved. The Royal Guard had positioned themselves in a defensive formation without appearing to do so, their hands near weapons they would never need to draw. "You are Guard Sergeant Kira Voss." The Queen's voice carried the resonance of command, each syllable precisely shaped. "You intervened in an altercation 17 minutes ago." It wasn't a question. Kira straightened. "Yes, Your Majesty. The students involved have filed a complaint. They claim you threatened them with violence. I cited integration protocol and requested they disperse. Your hand was on your weapon. Standard defensive posture when addressing potential threats to a minor, Your Majesty." The Queen's head tilted fractionally. Around her, the Royal Guard remained motionless, but Kira sensed their attention sharpening. This wasn't a random encounter. The Queen had come here deliberately, which meant this moment mattered in ways Kira didn't yet understand. "The child," Queen Sekhet said. "Describe her condition when you arrived." Kira met those alien eyes without flinching. "Terrified. Cornered. Outnumbered 3-1 by students significantly larger. They were employing verbal harassment with racial motivation." "Racial." The Queen repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. "You apply human concepts to Valthene's social structures. I apply universal concepts to bullying, Your Majesty. It looks the same across every species I've encountered." Silence stretched. One of the Royal Guards shifted almost imperceptibly, a sign of tension, quickly suppressed. The Queen's tendrils moved in patterns Kira couldn't interpret. "The child is Linnea of the outer bloodlines. Her mother violated caste protocols. The child bears the consequences of her mother's choices. The child bears the consequences of adults' cruelty," Kira said quietly. "That's what I saw." The temperature in the corridors seemed to drop. Kira had just contradicted a monarch to her face, in front of her personal guard. Every diplomatic instinct screamed that she'd crossed a line that might end her career or worse. But the Queen didn't react with anger. Instead, she stepped closer, studying Kira with an intensity that felt like being scanned at the molecular level. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, carrying a weight that wasn't about authority. "You have children, Guard Sergeant?" The question caught Kira off balance. "No, Your Majesty. Yet you recognize fear in a child of a species not your own. You acted without calculating political cost." The Queen paused. "Why?" Kira thought of Linnea's eyes, the resigned way she'd said you can't change what you are. "Because someone needed to." The Queen stared at her for a moment that extended into something approaching evaluation. Then she turned to her guards. "Leave us." The Royal Guard didn't question. They withdrew 15 paces and took up perimeter positions, far enough to grant privacy but close enough to respond to threats. When the Queen spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "Show me where it happened." Kira led the Valthene Queen to the recycling alcove. The space looked innocent now, just another corner of the Academy's infrastructure. But the scuff marks on the floor told the story of a child's desperate retreat, and the walls still bore the faint residue of stress pheromones that Valthene released in fear. Queen Sekhet placed her hand against the wall, her fingers tracing the invisible markers. Her tendrils went completely still, a sign Kira had learned meant deep concentration or profound emotion. When she withdrew her hand, her expression had transformed into something Kira couldn't name but recognized anyway. Grief. Controlled, absolute, devastating grief. 3 months ago, the queen said. My own daughter told me she was lonely at the academy. I asked why she didn't spend more time with her classmates. She said they were busy with important people. The queen's voice remained level, but something beneath it cracked. I dismissed her concerns. Royal children must learn resilience. That is what I told myself. Kira's chest tightened. Your Majesty, 2 weeks ago, she stopped mentioning other students entirely. Yesterday, her tutor informed me that Princess Vera refuses to leave her chambers except for mandatory instruction. When pressed, she says she prefers solitude. The queen turned to face Kira fully. I did not know why until I reviewed the security recordings this morning, seeking to understand her change in behavior. Understanding hit Kira like a physical blow. Linnea isn't the only one. No. The single word carried the weight of a civilization's shame. She is not. The recordings showed pattern. Systematic exclusion. Verbal harassment. Physical intimidation. Always when instructors were absent. Always against children whose bloodlines were deemed impure. The queen's hands clenched. My daughter, the crown princess, has been isolated and tormented for 3 months. And I, who pride myself on knowing my people, seeing all within my realm, noticed nothing. The royal guard remained statue still at their posts, but Kira sensed their attention riveted on this conversation. This wasn't just about Linnea anymore. This was about the heir to the Valthine throne. The students doing this, Kira said carefully. They're from the inner bloodlines? From the most prestigious families. Children of council members. Military commanders. Genetic purists who consider my daughter's mother, my late queen, to have been from an acceptable but not ideal bloodline. Bitter irony laced her words. They torment my child while smiling to my face in official functions. What will you do? Queen Sekhet was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. When she focused on Kira again, something had crystallized in those alien eyes. You risked your position for a child you did not know. You applied a concept you called universal, that suffering of the young demands intervention regardless of species or politics. She stepped closer. I would learn from this. Tell me, Guard Sergeant, what would humans do? Kira chose her words with precision. We would make it clear that protecting the vulnerable isn't optional. That cruelty to children, any children, carries consequences that transcend social status. We would ensure that those in power demonstrate the values they claim to uphold. Even if it meant confronting the most powerful families in your civilization? Especially then, Your Majesty. Because if power can't protect the helpless, it's just tyranny wearing a crown. The queen's tendrils rippled in a pattern that might have been approval or shock. Around them, the academy continued its normal operations, unaware that the foundation of its social order was being examined by the one being who could actually change it. I must see my daughter, Queen Sekhet said abruptly. I must ask her questions I should have asked months ago. But first, she turned to one of the royal guards. Summon Linnea of the outer bloodlines to the royal audience chamber. Inform her she is requested, not commanded. Ensure she understands she is in no trouble. The guard executed a sharp salute and departed at a run. The queen's expression softened as she watched him go. Before I face my own failures as a mother, I will correct one smaller injustice. You will accompany me, Guard Sergeant Voss. You began this revelation. You will see where it leads. They moved through the academy's corridors in a silence that felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Students who saw them coming pressed themselves against walls, their dermal ridges flaring in shock and fear. The queen walked past them without acknowledgement, her focus absolute. The royal audience chamber was smaller than Kira expected, a private space rather than the throne room she'd imagined. Soft bioluminescence created gentle pools of light, and the walls displayed holographic art from across the Valthine Empire. Within minutes, a guard arrived with Linnea, whose terror was palpable. Her entire body trembled, and her tendrils had curled so tightly against her skull they were nearly invisible. Queen Sekhet lowered herself to one knee, bringing her eyes level with the child's. The gesture shocked everyone present, including the royal guard. Queens didn't kneel. Not for anyone. Linnea, she said gently, I am told that older students have been cruel to you. Is this true? The child's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Finally, she managed a tiny nod. For how long? Since I arrived. 6 months. And you reported this to instructors? They said. Linnea's voice broke. They said I needed to be stronger. That if I couldn't handle criticism, I shouldn't be at the academy. That my mother's choices had consequences. Queen Seket's control was absolute, but Kira saw her hands tremble before she stilled them. Did they say why you deserved this treatment? Because my father was from the outer colonies. Because my blood is diluted. Because I make pure Valthine uncomfortable by existing. The words came out in a rush, as if Linnea had held them inside so long they'd fermented into poison. Look at me, child. Linnea raised her eyes, though it clearly cost her courage. I am Queen Seket, ruler of the Valthine people. My word is law across 17 systems. And I tell you now, with the royal guard as witness, you have done nothing wrong. Your existence is not a crime. Your heritage is not a flaw. Those who told you otherwise lied. Tears spilled down Linnea's cheeks, glowing faintly in the chamber's dim light. But they said I know what they said. They have said similar things to my daughter, the Crown Princess. They have created a culture of cruelty built on false concepts of purity and worthiness. The Queen reached out slowly, telegraphing the motion, and wiped tears from Linnea's face with infinite gentleness. That culture ends today. And it ends because a human guard showed me what I had failed to see, that protecting children must come before protecting tradition. She stood, and the weight of her authority filled the room like gravity increasing. You will be transferred to a new residential sector, overseen by instructors I personally select. You will attend classes with students who are taught that diversity strengthens the Valthine, not weakens us. And if anyone, student, instructor, administrator, harms you in any way, you will report directly to the Royal Guard. Do you understand? Linnea nodded, unable to speak. Good. Now go. Rest. Tomorrow begins your new education. When the child hesitated, the Queen added more softly. You are safe now, Linnea. I promise you this. After Linnea departed, escorted by 2 guards who would ensure she reached her quarters unmolested, the Queen turned to Kira. The students who tormented her will be summoned within the hour. Their families will be present. What they learn will reshape their understanding of consequence. And your daughter, Your Majesty? Pain flickered across the Queen's face. I must face what I have allowed to happen to my own child. That conversation will be difficult, but necessary. She paused. You will attend, Guard Sergeant Voss. As witness and reminder of what clarity can be achieved when someone refuses to look away. The summons to the families came swiftly. Within 2 hours, the formal throne room, vastly different from the intimate chamber where Linnea had been addressed, filled with Valthine nobility. The 3 students who had bullied Linnea stood with their parents, their earlier confidence evaporated. Kira stood to the side, her presence a deliberate statement that humans were not merely decorative additions to the Integration Academy. Queen Seket addressed them from her throne, and her voice carried no warmth. You stand accused of systematic harassment of a minor, racial discrimination, and violation of integration protocols. The evidence is documented. The testimony is clear. You have 3 options before you. The room waited in silence. First, public acknowledgement of your actions, formal apology to your victim, completion of a re-education program focused on the principles of the Integration Accords, and 1 year of supervised community service working with outer colony populations. Second, immediate expulsion from the academy with notation on your permanent educational records that will follow you throughout your lives. Third, trial by council tribunal, which I will personally attend and testify at regarding the broader pattern of abuse your actions represent. One of the parents stepped forward, a council member whose family had held power for generations. Your Majesty, surely for a first offense? First offense? The Queen's voice cut like a blade. Security recordings show 17 distinct incidents over 6 months targeting Linnea alone. Shall I detail each one? Shall I describe the day they cornered her in the hygiene facilities and told her she should drown herself to purify the academy's water? Or perhaps the time they destroyed her coursework and informed the instructor she was too incompetent to complete basic assignments? The council member paled, dermal ridges flattening. But you are correct that this is their first time being held accountable. That ends now. You have until this time tomorrow to inform me of your choice. If you fail to respond, I will assume you choose trial. The Queen's gaze swept across all three families. And understand this, I will prosecute with the full weight of the crown. The galaxy will watch as we either demonstrate that Valthene honor includes protecting the vulnerable, or as we reveal ourselves to be hypocrites who preach unity while practicing cruelty. The families departed in silence, their children's faces masks of shock. When the throne room emptied, the Queen's composure cracked slightly. She gestured to Kira. Now comes the harder part. Walk with me to my daughter's chambers. They moved through the royal wing, where security was tighter and the corridors reflected centuries of Valthene artistry. At a door marked with the royal crest, the Queen paused. Whatever happens in this room, Guard Sergeant, remember that I asked you to witness it. My pride must not protect me from truth. She opened the door. Princess Vera sat by a window that looked out over the academy grounds, her posture radiating defeat. She was perhaps 12 standard years, with the same regal bearing as her mother but none of the confidence. Her tendrils hung limp, and her skin had the pallor of someone who spent too much time alone. Mother. The word carried no warmth. I wasn't informed you were visiting. Because I didn't announce myself officially. Queen Sekit entered and sat across from her daughter, eschewing formal positioning. Vera, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Have students here been cruel to you? The princess's expression closed like a door slamming. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to protect me. Please. Something in the Queen's voice, vulnerability perhaps, or genuine pain, made Vera's composure fracture. Why does it matter? You told me being royal means being strong. Rising above petty concerns. Focusing on the greater good. I said that, yes? The Queen's voice was barely audible. I was wrong. Vera stared at her mother, as if she'd spoken in an unknown language. You what? I failed you. I taught you to endure when I should have taught those around you to be better. I told you to be strong when I should have eliminated threats to your well-being. I prioritized your development as a future queen over your safety as a child. The Queen's tendrils trembled. Tell me what they've done to you. All of it. Help me understand what I allowed to happen. The story came in fragments. Whispered insults in corridors, deliberate exclusion from study groups, anonymous messages questioning her worthiness to inherit the throne because her mother came from a lesser bloodline. Small cruelties that accumulated like poison. Vera had reported none of it, believing her mother would view complaints as weakness. And today, she finished, her voice breaking, I overheard them laughing about how the human guard threatened them for bullying some outer colony brat. They said if she hadn't interfered, they could have made the half-blood leave the academy. They said you'd reward them for protecting Valthene purity. Kira felt the Queen's rage like heat from a furnace, though her expression never changed. They said this believing I would approve? Queen Sekit asked quietly. They said their parents told them you secretly agree but can't say so publicly because of integration politics. The Queen stood and walked to the window, staring out at the academy she had helped establish, the institution meant to unite species in common purpose. I am going to tell you something now, my daughter, and I want you to remember it forever. Power that protects tradition at the expense of children is worthless. A throne built on the suffering of the vulnerable is not worth sitting upon. And any society that considers purity more important than kindness deserves to fall. She turned back to Vera. Tomorrow, I will address the entire academy. I will make it clear that the culture which allowed your suffering, and Linnea's suffering, and the suffering of every child targeted for being different, is over. Those responsible will face consequences. Those who enabled them through silence will face consequences. And we will rebuild this institution on principles that actually matter. The Council won't like that. The Council will learn to live with it, or they will be replaced. The Queen returned to her daughter and knelt again, taking Vera's hands. I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry for not seeing, for not acting, for teaching you to endure what you should never have had to face. Will you forgive me? Vera threw herself into her mother's arms, and both of them wept. Kira looked away, giving them what privacy she could in the moment. When they finally separated, the Queen's eyes were still wet, but her expression had hardened into determination. Guard Sergeant Voss, she said formally, you showed me what I had failed to see. You acted when no one else would. You demonstrated principles I claimed to hold but had forgotten to practice. For this you have my gratitude. She paused. But I would ask more of you. I need someone who will not be swayed by politics or tradition to oversee the Academy's restructuring. Someone who will see clearly and act justly. Would you accept the position of Integration Director? The offer was staggering. It meant power, influence, the ability to actually change systems rather than just respond to individual incidents. It also meant becoming a target for every family and faction that benefited from the status quo. Kira thought of Linnea, pressed against the wall by students who believed their bloodline made them better. She thought of Vera, isolated and tormented while trying to maintain the strength her role demanded. She thought of every child across the galaxy who learned early that different meant less, that survival required making themselves small. I accept, Your Majesty. On one condition. The Queen's tendrils rippled with curiosity. Name it. That you continue to be involved. That this isn't something you delegate and forget. That we reshape this place together, with you as visible proof that power can be wielded for protection rather than just control. For the first time since Kira had met her, Queen Sekit smiled, not the formal expression of official functions, but genuine warmth. Agreed. We begin tomorrow with my address to the Academy. Today, you will help me speak with every child whose suffering I ignored while pretending to see everything. She extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Together, we will teach this institution what justice actually means. Kira took the offered hand, feeling the cool, delicate strength of the Queen's grip. Around them, the royal chambers seemed to hold their breath, as if the walls themselves recognized that something fundamental had shifted. Outside the window, the Academy glowed with bioluminescence, beautiful and serene and utterly oblivious to the revolution beginning in its heart. The next morning, every student and instructor gathered in the Grand Assembly Hall, summoned by royal decree. The Queen stood on the central platform, her ceremonial robes catching light in ways that made her seem both impossibly ancient and vitally present. Kira stood to her left, wearing the insignia of her new position. To her right stood Linnea and Princess Vera, side by side, a statement in itself. I am here, Queen Sekit began, her voice amplified across the vast space, to acknowledge failure. My failure. The failure of this institution. The failure of a culture that valued bloodline purity over basic decency. Shocked silence rippled through the assembly. Queens didn't admit failure. They didn't stand before their subjects and confess weakness. But this one did. She detailed everything: the systematic harassment, the institutional blindness, her own daughter's suffering. She named no students specifically but made clear that accountability would come. She outlined new policies with teeth: mandatory reporting of harassment, independent review boards including representatives from all bloodlines, zero-tolerance enforcement regardless of family status. Some of you, she continued, believe that integration weakens the Valthine. That accepting other species, other bloodlines, dilutes what makes us strong. I tell you now that you are wrong. Our strength lies not in purity but in our capacity to evolve, to learn, to become more than what we were. A species that cannot protect its own children is not strong. It is dying. She gestured to Linnea and Vera. These children represent our future, not because of their bloodlines, but because they have endured what should never have been allowed. They survived a system designed to break them. And starting today, that system changes. The speech continued for another hour, laying out specifics of reform and consequences. When it ended, the assembly didn't applaud, the Valthine didn't express approval that way, but the silence that followed felt different. Heavier. Charged with understanding that the world had shifted. In the weeks that followed, resistance came from expected quarters. 3 council members resigned rather than support the reforms. Several prestigious families withdrew their children from the academy. But others stepped forward, instructors who had witnessed cruelty but felt powerless to stop it, students who had been silent victims, families from the outer colonies who had believed the academy would never truly welcome them. Kira worked 16-hour days, restructuring curricula, interviewing potential instructors, implementing accountability systems. The Queen kept her promise, attending meetings, making her support visible. Slowly, the culture began to change. 6 months later, Kira stood in the same recycling alcove where she'd first intervened. The walls had been repainted with student artwork celebrating diversity, not in corporate, performative ways, but genuine expressions of young beings learning to see beauty in difference. She heard footsteps and turned to find Linnea, no longer the terrified child from that first encounter. "Director Voss," the girl said formally, then grinned. "I wanted to show you my latest assignment. I got top marks." Kira took the datapad and scanned the report on comparative Valthine bloodline genetics. The analysis was sophisticated, arguing that genetic diversity actually strengthens species resilience. "This is excellent work. Princess Vera helped me with the research. We've been studying together." Linnea's tendrils performed a happy dance. "She's actually really funny when she's not being formal all the time. I'm glad you're friends." "Me too." Linnea paused, her expression turning serious. "I remember you told me things would change. I didn't believe you. I thought nothing ever really changes. What do you think now?" The girl looked around the alcove, at the artwork, at the open corridor where students of all bloodlines moved freely and interacted without the rigid hierarchy that had defined the academy before. "I think maybe sometimes things change because someone decides they should. And then, other people realize they can help. And eventually, what seemed impossible just becomes normal." "That's exactly right." After Linnea departed, Kira remained in the alcove, thinking about all the moments that had led here. A child pressed against a wall. A queen confronting her own blindness. A decision to act when looking away would have been easier. She felt a presence and turned to find Queen Sekit standing at the alcove entrance, her expression contemplative. They'd developed an easy working relationship over the months, though Kira never forgot the vast difference in their positions. "I come here sometimes," the Queen admitted, "to remind myself what almost was. What would have continued if you hadn't chosen to see Linnea's fear as more important than political convenience? I just did what needed doing, Your Majesty." "No." The Queen stepped into the alcove, placing her hand where Linnea had once cowered. "You did what was right when everyone else, including me, had convinced themselves that the cost of doing right was too high. You demonstrated that principle matters more than power. That lesson has rippled far beyond this academy." She was right. Word had spread across the integration network. Other institutions had begun examining their own policies. The Valthine Council had initiated reforms Kira suspected the Queen had wanted for years but lacked the catalyst to demand. "Change is fragile," Queen Sekit continued. "It requires constant attention and courage. Some days I wonder if we've truly transformed or just painted new colors over old structures." "Both, probably," Kira said. "Real change takes generations. But it has to start somewhere." Was someone saying this is wrong and refusing to accept the easy answers for why it can't be fixed? The Queen's tendrils rippled in agreement. "My daughter asked me recently why we have royal guards. I told her the ceremonial answer about protection and tradition. She said, no, really why? What are we protecting? And I realized the answer had changed. We protect the possibility that tomorrow can be better than today. That the weak need not fear the strong. That being different is not the same as being less. That's a good answer. She learned it from watching you work. From seeing that a human guard could reshape Valthene culture by simply refusing to accept cruelty as inevitable. The Queen turned to face Kira fully. The integration accords speak of mutual benefit and shared prosperity. But I think the true value lies in this, that we force each other to see our own failures through foreign eyes. You showed me what I had become blind to. For that, the Valthene people owe you a debt that cannot be measured. Kira felt uncomfortable with such praise. I just stood up for a kid who needed help. Exactly. You treated it as simple when everyone else had made it complicated. You saw a frightened child and didn't calculate the political ramifications before acting. That simplicity, that clarity, is what changed everything. They stood together in the alcove, two beings from different worlds who had found common ground in the simple conviction that children deserved protection. Outside, the academy continued its daily rhythm, transformed but still learning, still growing into what it might become. Eventually, the Queen departed for other duties, and Kira returned to her office to tackle the endless work of institutional change. But she found herself pausing at the window, looking out over the grounds where students of every species and bloodline moved together without fear. Where Linnea laughed with friends. Where Vera studied openly instead of hiding in her chambers. It wasn't perfect. Prejudice didn't evaporate overnight. Old attitudes persisted in corners and whispers. But it was better. Measurably, undeniably better. And it had started because someone had decided that a small, frightened child mattered more than maintaining comfortable lies about bloodline purity. Kira's wrist-com chimed with an incoming message from Queen Sekit. Thank you. For everything. But especially for being the kind of being who couldn't walk past a child in need. That quality is rarer than it should be. As she smiled and returned to work. Somewhere in the academy, a child who might once have been targeted for being different attended class without fear. Somewhere else, a student who might have become a bully learned a different way to understand strength. And in the royal chambers, a queen who had learned to see clearly taught her daughter that power meant nothing without compassion. The transformation would continue, imperfect and ongoing. But it had begun. Because a human guard had looked at a small alien girl and seen not a political calculation but simply a child who needed help. And in that moment everything had changed.